In looking at the content and the style of the messages that go out across all the different hazards we've looked at, there are some things that matter more than others. And here are the things that matter more. Hazard impact. Here is an example of a message. Now, this is important not to look at the number of retweets for this specific message, because this is looking across all 4 events that we've studied so far, and I can tell you that hazard impact, those messages do get retweeted more. This particular single instance is not representative of the whole 10,000 messages we've coded. But hazard impact, reports of explosions, injuries at finish line at, this has hashtag Boston Marathon, public safety agencies on scene, no further info at this time. This is clear. The language, it's not instructional. It does include a hashtag, but it didn't end up trending. But it includes that content that was very important. Here's an example of hazard guidance that tells people what to do, the instructional style. And it says, retweet at Notify Boston. Notify Boston is an alerting agency for the city of Boston. And it says, please avoid area of Copley Square to allow first responders to work. Again, just an example of the kind of message that makes a difference, this kind of content. We also know that if you tell people what to do instead of just making a statement, those messages tend to get retweeted more often. So the top message is not instructional, it just provides a declarative statement, whereas the bottom one actually tells people, although in a pleasant way, please avoid this area. And we also know that if you include a hashtag, it does tend to be retweeted more often for some obvious reasons I think we've already touched on. So let's talk a little bit about the sender. Here's that image I've been talking about in terms of the growth of the network, or in terms of follower numbers over the course of that particular week. This actually goes from April 14th to April 29th. And we included those additional dates to make a particular point. But you'll notice this one is Cheryl. She starts at just a couple hundred people, and on the end of the first day, she's reached nearly 9,000 new followers. We see in most of the events that we follow that there is extreme growth at the beginning of the event. That's a consistent finding across different hazard events. In this particular event, we also see growth within the local organizations most. So Cheryl and the Boston Police. We see in the middle of the week there's some increased growth around the mayor and the Massachusetts State Police. And at the end of the week, Boston Police has another jump also. So we're seeing...
you should point out to everyone this is on a logarithmic scale.
Thank you, yes.
The differences are much bigger than they.
Yes, they are much bigger because, yes, it's logged. Thank you.
This crowd is probably, for the most part, not used to that.
Okay, thank you very much. And as a quantitative person, I can tell that you picked up on that. And I am qualitatively oriented, so if I give an explanation that doesn't make sense, I apologize. I am the one who always does the content analysis and the coding and not the math. When you put something on a log scale, it basically equalizes the account so that you can look at the differences in a way that you're not looking at FEMA way up here on the chart and Cheryl way down here on the chart. You bring them together so you can compare them. So what we see is there's an incredible growth at the beginning and then again at the end as the event evolved. And importantly here, we see after the event that those same accounts retain their followers, which is an important aspect, thinking about the audience that you capture as an event unfolds and then remains afterwards and the opportunity you might have to continue to put information out. Now, another thing about information management, which is essentially what the sender has become, is an information manager, no longer just inserting information, but actually monitoring information also. We saw some examples during the Boston Marathon that I think are important to just call your attention to. And here I wanted to read to you a Harvard study that came out of the PLOS, which says Twitter as a sentinel in emergency situations. Harvard researchers found that tweets mentioning the explosions began to appear 6 minutes before public health authorities sent alerts to emergency departments. And at Mass General, hospital staff were alerted to the bombings when a physician at the scene sent a tweet. The message was picked up by an anesthesiologist who suggested that his boss pause elective surgery, patients began arriving by car, van, and ambulance to a full emergency department several minutes later. So in this particular instance, the monitoring of information online helped them to get ahead of the event, which I think was mentioned earlier by someone who was up here. This little website in the middle called The Stir is actually a blog, and this was just really interesting because it got 2.2 thousand likes on Facebook, which meant that there was a great deal of attention of people actually going to this little blog online and passing it along to their friends. So monitoring that conversation on different kinds of channels is important too. And then this is the example of how social media misidentified the suspect and the terrible havoc it caused on that boy's life when the Reddit group of users came together and did their own detective work and were able to identify someone who it just was the wrong person. So monitoring what's happening on social media is also a really important part of that information management. But networking is also a significant aspect of what happens in every disaster event, and one of the things that needs to be considered prior to an event in terms of knowing your partners, because of the ability, as you were raising, to actually coordinate your messages and coordinate the content. When messages when you're connected to the right organizations, you can amplify them and they can amplify you. They can reinforce one another. They can be consistent from one organization to the next. Knowing partners ahead of time makes a great deal of sense. And it also can help to determine the channel or the hashtag ahead of time. Leslie and I were talking about this. How do you know what channel to use before an event happens or as an event is unfolding as an organization? I leave that up to you to consider which hashtag you might use. But thinking about the policies or the strategies beforehand, that preparing to communicate is very, very important.